Hi, and today I'm going to follow up that wonderful budget PC video I done with one of the solutions I proposed. And there was a couple, so I looked at creating a new one with a Ryzen APU, and the other one was to use an old workstation, mainly from a business. So like in the instance I was looking at, maybe a Dell 920 or a 3020. And I actually managed to pick up a Dell 3020 very reasonably on eBay, albeit there was a few challenges. There's, the CD drive was missing, a few other bits, and I've kind of almost Frankensteined it for now, but that doesn't matter. That's the key part. What I wanted to do, though, is obviously kind of follow up that little series that I made just to kind of show what you can achieve from a gaming point of view. Now, I am going to try and run certain games, and I will come back and discuss that. The other key part, what I was looking for, though, is this. So I managed to get one. Now, I picked this up for about $139.99 from eBuyer in the UK. I haven't used eBuyer in a very, very long time, so it was quite nice to actually reset myself up with them and buy something. It's probably been at least 10 years since I bought anything off eBuyer. But this turned out very quickly. So I'm going to stick it in the 3020 and then I'm going to do some benchmarking. Okay, let's take a look then at the Dell 3020. This is the one I managed to pick up on eBay. Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, ignore the fact that the CD drive's hanging out. I'll explain why that is in a moment. It didn't actually come with one. I've used another solution. Now, it did come with an i5 processor, but I have upgraded that. Now, if we actually look at the lid, it's not in that bad a condition. And the rest of it, to be honest, isn't too bad. Now, at the back, as standard, ignore the graphics card because I've fitted that. You've got your power supply, your 1 gigabit network adapter. You get 2 standard USB 2s, USB 3, 2 more USB 2s, a VGA, and then a display port. Well, obviously, I'm going to be using the card that I've installed. Now, if we're to look at what I've done inside, you can see that's what I was getting at. Well, these are adapters, so they basically turn a CD drive into a standard SSD port, or you can put a spinny laptop disk in there. Uses the right power connector, so it makes life really easy. I'll stick a link for Amazon where you can get those from. Everything else is pretty standard apart from the RTX I put in. What I've also done is upgraded the memory to 16, which is the maximum it would take, and changed the processor out for an i7. So yeah, it's a little bit cramped inside. Now I do have under this, just hanging loosely at the moment, a value 500 gig SSD that I've been using. I actually got, I think, with the... I actually got it with the P700. So the final resting area of my device will be in this little cubby hole, which sits in my lounge. So, next to the TV and various bits. And connected to it, I've added a Western Digital black 12 terabyte drive, which I'm going to use to store the games on. So what I'm going to try and do, now I am using a 4K TV, but what I've done is hard set it at 1080p for this, just so that when I do the benchmarking, it's not trying to upscale at any point, because I don't want anything to skew the numbers. I have, like I mentioned, upgraded it to the very top end of what you can do with this, so I'll put the very fastest i7 in and put the maximum amount of memory in. It's probably not the highest clock speed memory I could fit in this, but nevertheless, it is the highest amount I could put in. So, yeah, let's go on with some benchmarking. So the games I'm going to benchmark are as follows. I'll start with maybe something like GTA 5. I've kind of played around with that before and done a few things. Possibly then Rocket League. See how we get on with that. Rocket League's quite low bar, really. I'll look at running 3D Mark on it to see what kind of response we get there, and therefore it will kind of give us theoretical numbers for some of the games that it can potentially play.
I'll try Horizon Zero Dawn, which I'm not expecting to work very well, and probably finish off with CyberPunk. Now, I will say I'm not going to, one, overclock the graphics card. I'm not also going to mess around too much with the settings. I might just try to make sure it runs fairly stable. I'm pretty sure you can gain a lot more performance out of this solution. However, what I wanted to show was almost an out-the-box type of reality for you. If you went and bought this, didn't tinker around with it, and just run it. So first up is GTA 5, and I'm running this at very high settings. If you do see any pixelation on the screen, it's just because I've scaled this up to 4K for this video. It actually looked really, really good at 1080p on the screen I was playing it on. Well, the challenge is I was using one of my capture cards. I could have probably just done it directly on the machine, but I didn't want anything else running to pull information off there. So any pixelation you see is not what you'd experience in the actual game. And as you can see, it kind of fluctuates from a FPS point of view. It tends to sit quite happily above the 80 mark. Some points going higher. So from that perspective, runs really, really well. And to be honest, like I said, I haven't really done a lot of tinkering with this. So I'm pretty sure we could get some more performance out of this. GPU is currently running at 84 degrees C. I think that's potentially one challenge. You could certainly hear it in the Dell unit. As you can see, it's also running pretty much 98 to 97% total usage, but only drawing anywhere between 30 to 45 watts, so fairly reasonably performing that way. CPU, you can see, is also ramped up quite a bit, so just something to be aware of. But yeah, I'll shut up now and just kind of let you watch a bit of gameplay. You can see the lows sometimes dip into the 50s. And Rocket League, and I probably need to note I did lock this at 60 frames per second, so you shouldn't actually see anything above that. Again, performed really, really well. It was very smooth, very receptive. Didn't have too many challenge. Like I mentioned before, any pixelation is just down to the upscale that I've done on this for the video. But yeah, no real problems. Obviously, it's not stressing the GPU as much. CPU's probably again hovering around that kind of mark, but run really, really smooth. You know, I mean, this game isn't the most intense to run anyway, but it was quite nice just to give it a test, because it's you know, something I've actually tested on other devices. So that made total sense. Okay, so the proper acid test, I decided to try Horizon Zero Dawn on this. And yes, as you can probably see, it's not great. I mean, this is on the lowest settings, so yeah. But then I wasn't expecting to do too much on this. Again, I think tinkering around, we probably could get better performance than this. I kind of just lowered everything to, you know, what I possibly can and dropped the resolution down to work. But from that point, not really pushed it to its limits, so I think we could probably get something. But to be honest, this isn't the kind of game you'd expect to run on this kind of setup. So, you know, this is one of the extremes, and when I get to CyberPunk, that's the other end of the extreme, really. But yeah. So the question is, will it run CyberPunk? The answer is yes. You can see the frames per second, lows in the 9s, highs in the 30s. And again, like I said, I've not played around with this massively. I've kind of just lowered stuff down as much as I can without really tinkering with the settings. You can see how much RAM it's using. It's pretty much using almost all the allocation, bar the two the system's probably using itself. GPU's at about 75 watts. 74 degrees, sorry, and running at about 31 watts. And GPU temperature is right up there. As you can see, it's using all the memory available to the graphics card. So primarily, I think realistically, that's what the bottleneck is here. It's not necessarily the actual amount of cores. It's probably the actual VRAM available that causes some of the challenges. But yeah, it's just kind of showing you what could be done. And again, I think we could gain more if we tinkered. So moving on to 3D Mark, and I won't talk too much about this. I just wanted to see this in action and it running. So I kind of just left it running away a little bit so that you can kind of get the frames per second. You can kind of view, I've run this on my own machine just to kind of get a difference in clarity, and that, bear in mind, has a lot higher spec processor and graphics card. You could see the difference. You know, and it was probably twice as powerful in performance-wise. But again, this is designed to stress test, so you kind of get the view of what it is capable of. Finally, I just wanted to show you the 3D Mark score that we've got out running Time Spy. So again, this is probably a good indication. It gives you an idea of what this could be capable of. So if we just go to 1080p Ultra, tell me Battlefield 5 can run at 80. GTA is expecting to run at 150, so that kind of shows I probably didn't get the most out of it earlier. Fortnite, if you were going to run it, 165. And if we go down to something like Red Dead Redemption, 45, which is expected. Now, I did run this on my machine, and I did run this while under load, so I had a lot of stuff running. So that's a comparative score of running a 3070 Ti and, you know, a Ryzen 5800 3DX against what this current system is. So in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty impressive. When we're using hardware that's probably around 6+ years old now, if not more. I mean, if that's generation 4, we're on the 13th generation of Intels now. So yeah, I'm sure you can do the maths. It's quite some time now. And albeit what we've added is a graphics card into that scenario, updated the processor to an i7, albeit 4th gen, and dropped in a little bit more memory. Now, I did also run those games off an external Western Digital black drive, so the theoretical read speeds and write speeds are only ever going to be around 260 Mbps, roughly. If I run them off an SSD, we'd certainly see a better performance, potentially on those random reads. Obviously, with a game, we're not potentially writing a lot, but the read speeds would potentially make an impact. And I might do a follow-on video where I've kind of tweaked around with settings a little bit more, maybe put a 1 or 2 terabyte SSD into that tray that I had, and then rerun some of these scores. But for what we were trying to achieve was a machine under £300 or $300 roughly. I don't think that's that bad. It can run GTA 5 really, really well at 1080p. And I'm pretty sure it will run most, not AAA titles, but AA titles. There may have been AAA titles back in the day, but anything that's probably not been made in the last maybe 4 years or so, that's not pushing the boundaries of requirements, will happily run at medium settings. Even maybe very high in some circumstances. So what have we learned? Well, we've learned that the Dell 3020 is more than capable of delivering our needs for this requirement. I suppose the biggest challenge will be around the suitability of a graphics card with only 4GB VRAM installed. Now you start to push the limits if you're trying to run the latest AAA titles. That being said, as long as you're running something reasonable at 1080p, it will handle it pretty well. Most games, if they've not been developed in those last few years, without really pushing the graphic fidelity range and obviously requiring something like ray tracing, will most likely work fairly happily. So I suppose it depends on your use case. If you are trying to run AAA games and the latest ones, you would be absolutely insane to try to run them on this. You'd certainly need to make sure that you're running something like the NVIDIA 3000 upwards series. Certainly, if you can afford to give up a small kidney, you could go and buy the very latest NVIDIA 4000 range. There's also other options with Radeon. They're certainly making inroads with the RDNA 3 architecture. And I think the biggest thing is that AMD are continuously making inroads there. We've also had the likes of Intel come out with their Intel Arc series. Not heard such good things about those. I'm yet to get my hands on one of those graphics cards, but I happily at some point will do a cover story on those if one ever happens to hit my doorstep. But today we wanted to talk about the Dell doing PC gaming on a cheap but affordable way using old tech. And also what it's doing is preventing potential e-waste. So instead of throwing away those old desktops, maybe think about how you can repurpose those. I could certainly build that also into a Plex media server or a Jellyfin media server. There's certainly other opportunities that I could use them for. If you haven't, go and maybe watch one of my Proxmox series where you can reutilize that kind of hardware to do virtualization. And if you haven't, maybe go and watch my virtualization version of a gaming server. You may be able to hear it in the background today because I've got it running. But we've covered off what I wanted to today. So if you have enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.